So I'd like to welcome you once again to today and tomorrow's course on community solar program and design elements. So just a very brief overview of the day one agenda. Joyce will momentarily go into more details about it. We're starting off with some introductions. We'll have some polling questions here in a moment. And then Joyce will go over community solar national market overview and trends, and she'll get into a definition of community solar and explain a little bit more about the NCSP. Starting at 12:25, we'll hear about program goals. Then we'll move into site selection, and we'll also hear from a couple of public power representatives, and they will also discuss how they got decided upon their site selections for their programs. We'll take a break around 12:45 or so, come back for a discussion about program design elements, sort of the 10 commandments of, or maybe not commandments, of strong suggestions for designing your community solar programs. And then towards the end of the day, about 1:30 or so, we're going to get into our breakout sessions. And Joyce, once again, will go into a little bit more detail about what we'll be discussing. And this will be an opportunity for everyone to talk and talk through some of the worksheet elements, but also some of your questions, concerns, anything you'd like to think about when it comes to community solar. And then we'll close the day at 2 o'clock. These are our course learning objectives. I'll go over them briefly. First, at the conclusion of this course, we hope participants will be able to first develop a draft community solar program description. Second, select program and the subscription design elements that match utility goals and priorities. And then finally, identify community solar program design elements that encourage participation by low to moderate income households. I'd like to introduce our speakers today. We have two representatives from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, Joyce McLaren, who's the Senior Research Analyst for NREL, and she's joined by her colleague Simon Sandler, Research Analyst for NREL. And their bios are on the pages here as well. We were also hearing from Austin Energy, Tim Harvey, Customer Renewable Solutions Manager, and from Longmont Power and Communications, Hannah Mulroy, who is the Energy Portfolio and Development Manager.
Great, thank you, Paul. Yeah, and welcome everybody. It really is exciting to see the list of registrants for today's course, and it mimics the last iteration of this course where we had people from literally across the country representing many states, and I see that's the case here too. So, and I recognize that some of you may know quite a bit about solar already, including you may have community solar programs. Whereas others of you may be not very familiar with community solar at all. So I just want to say, please ask questions throughout the day. If you have questions during a time when we're not paused for questions specifically, feel free to put them in the chat and we will pause to answer those if it's appropriate at that time, but please go ahead and write them down so that you don't forget them. And there really are no silly questions here. Don't feel shy to ask any level of question, whether it's very basic or more in the weeds, and we will try to get to it. Yeah, so community solar overview. We actually have shortened this section a little bit based on replies from the last course. So it will go quickly, and feel free to ask for more information about the market and the overview, the trends nationally if you want more information. But let's advance the slide. And I'll first tell you about the National Community Solar Partnership, which is a national group of stakeholders that have come together. It basically, to be a member of the National Community Solar Partnership, you just have to be interested in community solar. That's it. You just have to want to know more about community solar. It's free to join. This is a DOE sponsored program, Department of Energy sponsored program, and it is implemented by a whole handful of organizations, including the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, where I work. Lawrence Berkeley Lab, APPA, of course, has been involved, as well as nonprofit organizations and consulting organizations across the country come together to implement this program. And the stakeholders are everything from utilities to developers to nonprofit organizations, community members that are interested in developing community solar. So I would encourage you to look up the National Community Solar Partnership and join, which gets you onto a platform It's kind of like a Facebook of community solar. And that is a platform where you can exchange messages with other people who are in the partnership. You can put out requests for information, things like that. There are a lot of resources linked. There's links to a lot of different resources specifically about community solar, different topics, different categories of resources there. There are videos and webinars that we host through that platform. So I would encourage you to follow the link in these slides and check that out if you're not already a member. The partnership has goals and has identified 5 meaningful benefits of community solar. And those benefits are to increase the household savings due to community solar, to bring solar access to low and moderate income households, to increase the resilience and the grid benefits through community solar, and to enhance community ownership opportunities and workforce development and entrepreneurship opportunities through the use of community solar. So all of our programs and our efforts within the NCSP, within the partnership, are really aimed at each of these 5 benefits. We really focus our efforts around these benefits and encourage our partners that join the partnership to do so as well in their own programs that they're implementing, whether it's in your utility or a state level program. We really encourage folks to focus on these 5 benefits that community solar can bring to our communities. So let's move to the definition that we use for community solar. And I will say that the NCSP and Department of Energy take a very broad definition of community solar. There are a number of different models that can be used to design projects and programs. And we encourage folks to try all of them. There's not one way to design a community solar program or project. And really the elements that are important to us in our definition is that the solar installation has multiple off-takers or owners, and we usually refer to those as subscribers to the project. And those subscribers enter into a contractual relationship with the owner or the operator of the solar installation, or an intermediary that's serving as a customer management type organization, and that the subscribers receive some or all of the financial returns or benefits from their predefined share of that solar installation, of the output of it. So that's a general definition that we use. Basically, it's this multiple people off-taking energy, or somehow multiple subscribers benefiting from a single project is the important element here. And then again, referring back to those meaningful benefits of reducing the energy burden or the cost of energy to those subscribers, providing access to low and moderate income households, or households that could not take advantage of solar otherwise, resilience, siting issues, addressing resilience and grid benefits. And of course, the utility plays a huge role in that piece, and then the community development aspects of it. So those are the important aspects of the definition to us. Let's continue on. So across the country, this data is actually 1 year old now, mid 22. But as of then, we had 39 states plus DC participating in community solar, having projects. We had more than 3,200 megawatts AC of installed capacity. Now that is certainly more, as we've seen some development over the past year. And we had a lot of the development was concentrated in about 74% of it was concentrated in only 4 states. Florida was a big one. Florida has a different type of markets in the sense that only utilities can develop those projects. Minnesota, New York, and Massachusetts also had a lot of development there with several different models. Since then, we have seen growth in other states as well, and we anticipate growth in additional states moving forward as we see an influx of money from some of the new legislation. So this chart will hopefully change over the coming couple of years. So a lot of that, the growth, and again, this map is, the data is 1 year old, and a lot of that growth had to do with enabling policies in different states. So in the blue on the map here are states that had very specific enabling policies for community solar, that supported community solar, whether that be a state level program like Illinois, or simply just virtual net metering being enabled and encouraged for which allows that the off-takers to be multiple off-takers to subscribe to one project that's not physically located on their property. So there are legislative actions being taken across the country. The ones as of last year are listed here in orange. And I think there's some new ones since then that are being considered. So this is an ever-changing map. And you may have more information about what's going on in your state than we do actually, because things do change quickly. So I see a question from Charles that says, why is community solar currently concentrated in just 4 states? And I think that a lot of that has to do with these policies, these state level policies, and just the environment that was created, whether or not it was supportive, in particular, net metering, virtual net metering, whether or not states were encouraging utilities or requiring utilities to offer community solar programs. So like in Colorado, very early on, there was a requirement to offer community solar. So that of course stimulated the development at a very early stage compared to some of the other states that didn't have policies like that. I hope that answers the question. So now before I hand this off to our 2 visiting star utilities, Austin and Longmont, to talk about their own programs, I'd like just to point out that it's really important to think about why you want community solar before you decide how to design your program. Just to take a step back and decide, well, what are our utilities goals for having community solar? Because some of these design elements are really, you want to choose the design element based on what your goal is, what you want to accomplish. So if your main goal is to offer solar to low and moderate income households that wouldn't be able to access solar otherwise, then you want to be careful to choose design elements that support that goal, if that's your primary goal. And we'll see as we go through these design elements how some of them, the selection amongst the options, will support LMI household participation more than other options that you might select. So we'll see how that is. So we want to talk a little bit about why you want community solar. What are your goals for this program? And I would encourage you to jot down your own thoughts when you have them, so that you can talk about those as we move into breakouts. You can share those with others as we move into the breakouts later on in the day, because we do want to share sort of like what is the point? Why are we here? Why do we want to have a community solar program? Or if you already have one, what are the goals that your utility has settled on as being the primary reasons for moving forward? So with that, I think I will pass it on to Tim at Austin to talk about the Austin program and why they moved forward with community solar.
Hello, and thank you for showing up to this. Really excited to see such a large audience here and the interest in community solar programs. Just a quick introduction to Austin Energy's portfolio so far. We started off with the Palmer Event Center up there in the upper left-hand corner. It's a pretty small array at 185 kilowatts. And then we built the La Loma solar farm, which is an additional 2.6, which is down there in the lower left. And then the airport solar, which is 1.5 megawatts. Next slide. So the first step, you know, as Joyce pointed out, you really want to figure out what your goals are. And one of Austin Energy's goals was to ensure that we could provide access to solar to low income customers. And we also wanted to, you know, start to proliferate solar projects in the community. So the first step for us was to engage with our stakeholders. And we tried to have a really broad group of stakeholders, including the school districts and neighborhood associations, and, you know, educational institutions, et cetera. And I'm not going to read all these off, but you can kind of see there, we've really kind of engaged with a broad group of stakeholders to get it launched, get their views and opinions on what the objectives should be and how to approach those. And I think that, you know, if absent this step, you're just not going to get the satisfaction that from the customers that you need. And so this is really critical. And so I encourage you all to have pretty elaborate stakeholder processes as one of your first steps. Next slide, please. Oops, I think that was backwards. Here we go. Yeah, so equity and inclusion considerations for Austin Energy. We want to, you know, expand the solar offerings for everybody who is unable to purchase a rooftop solar. So, you know, we're talking about renters of all kinds, apartment dwellers and whatnot. And additionally, you know, folks that don't have solar access on their homes. Austin is a pretty treed city. So there are some homes that just don't have that solar access. So we wanted to reach out and be able to have an offering for them. Obviously, we wanted to increase that solar access to low to moderate income customers. We want to encourage workforce development and the use of those workforce development programs. So in order to do that, when we do an RFP to go out for additional community solar, we require that the respondents have a workforce development plan as part of their proposal. We try to create opportunities for customer engagement and education. For example, the La Loma solar farm is on the east side of Austin in a low-income community. We do regular tours at that solar farm. I think so far this year we've done 12 tours, and so, you know, we're really like getting a lot of students, students from UT even, and the elementary schools and high schools around the area. And so we reach out and try to engage with the learning community. Cross-promotional opportunities. So, you know, as part of the program material and the marketing that we use for community solar, we provide our customers with other opportunities that we have from the utility to help promote energy efficiency and demand response, et cetera. creative pathways to community and grid resilience. So this is something that we're really working on right now, especially in the aftermath of Uri and these recent events that are causing grid disruptions. So we want to find creative ways to use solar and co-located batteries to provide resilience in the community. And the first step of that for us is we have identified community centers on the, in the Eastern Crescent, which is where most of our low to moderate income is. And we are working towards outfitting those community resilience hubs with solar and battery backup, with also, additional backup generation on top of that, so that we can uphold those resiliency centers for long periods of time. And then, we try to leverage projects as possible for non-wires alternatives. And if you're not familiar with that approach, basically non-wires alternatives is where you identify areas of load growth and grid constraint in your distribution grid, and you can strategically locate solar and battery projects to help to offset the need for future expansion of our grid capacity expansion. So by pushing out those potential expensive projects, for extended periods of time, you save money. So that's a strategy for locating community solar projects. So yeah, thank you. So what are the goals and challenges? These are the ones that we've identified. So one of the goals is to reduce the cost of participation in community solar. Right now, the way we have our community solar program set up, it's a subscription program, and there are market rate customers that pay a premium, and then that greens up 100% of their energy consumption. And then half of the program is dedicated to low income customers who get a discount on their bill. And it also greens up 100% of their consumption. So, part of the challenge is to have a portfolio that can facilitate that in a way that doesn't require additional funding from, non-participating customers. And so that's a really hard thing to do. We haven't managed to do that yet, but we do have strategies that we're putting in place to get there. And I'll talk about that in the future here. So right now our offering is only for residential, but we're looking to create a commercial offering as well. One of the things that commercial customers are more interested in these days is the idea of load matching. And currently we have Green Choice, which is a wind product that we offer to commercial customers. And it matches on an annual net basis. But for it to load match, you have to have the generation and or store generation to meet their load at the time that they're consuming power. And so we're looking into these potential offerings for certain commercial customers. We want to, can you go back? We want to increase community engagement. And so this means getting deeper into the community, having more of these stakeholder meetings, increasing awareness, and just giving the communities more opportunity to engage and learn and benefit from solar. So one of the things that we do for low income customers is, first of all, there's no upfront costs, there's no penalty to get out, and it's really easy to sign up. So for them, we make it super simple. Once we expand the program, which we plan to do, we will potentially auto enroll new low-income customers. And, you know, just to touch a little bit about how Austin Energy runs our low-income customer program, which we call the CAP program, or Customer Assistance Program. Basically, if a customer is participating in one of any 8 low-income benefit programs from either the federal government or the state government, then we're able to see that they're on those lists and participating in those programs. And then we auto enroll them into the CAP program. So that's an easy way for us to get customers in. It's easy for the customers because they don't have to go through a, you know, strenuous application process and attest to their income level and all the verification and stuff that goes with that. It's already been done by those other organizations. So we're kind of piggybacking on that. Expanded project capacity to enable more participation. So, you know, we just need to grow that portfolio, and we're working on ways to do that. And again, I'll talk about some of those approaches later. Next slide. So how are we expanding the portfolio? Well, we're partnering with the Equity Office to develop strategies for community engagement. We're in the process of developing a standard offer for developers of community solar projects. So just a little background on that. In the past, we've went out for some RFPs, and the proposals to come back with high cost that we're going to just basically not only scale the program, which is what we want to do, but also scale the cross subsidization that happens within the program, which is not what we want to do. So what our new approach that we're working on is to put out standard offers, or a standard offer or multiple offers based on the project size and different attributes of the project, and put out and post a price that the contractor community can meet. And so, you know, this is kind of like, it's very akin to a feed-in tariff, I would say, not exactly the same, but, you know, that approach we're hoping will help us to expand the portfolio within cost margins that we're comfortable with. So we're also looking to identify site hosts, which will help to facilitate not only the standard offer, but potential RFPs in the future. And we're partnering with other departments of the city to use City of Austin municipally owned buildings for additional community solar. And we're partnering with the Office of Sustainability, as I mentioned earlier, to work on solar and storage at resiliency hubs. Next slide. And that's it for Austin.
Tim, there was a couple of questions that came in. One was about whether or not the FAA had any concerns about the airport solar.
Yeah, we had to go through a review with the FAA to make sure it was like a glare analysis, essentially, and it wasn't too painful. The airport helped us, you know, with all that paperwork and whatnot, but it really, it took a little time, but it wasn't too painful.
And to clarify, I think you did. What do you mean by expand the portfolio? Simply develop more community solar?
Yeah, develop more community solar and subscribe, you know, more customers. Okay. And also go from residential and potentially include commercial as well.
I think that's only questions. All right, Hannah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. Good afternoon, morning, everyone, wherever you are. Thank you for attending. I agree with Tim. It's really exciting to see such a broad range of folks here in such a big group. So thank you very much for taking your time to participate today. I have slightly less slides than Tim does because we were a little earlier on our community solar journey than Austin is. I want to give you a little context on Longmont, Colorado, given you may not know where it is opposed to Austin. So we are a city located in northern Colorado, kind of directly between Denver and Fort Collins, about 45 minutes each way up I-25. We straddle, we're majority in Boulder County, but we also straddle Weld County. There's quite a interesting kind of political and land use type of division where the county line hits. So that's always an interesting thing we have to work with because of a lot of big pieces of land are in Weld. We have about 100,000 residents as of the most recent census, and 45,000 electric meters to give you a scope of our service territory. One big thing is we are one of 4 owner communities of Platte River Power Authority, which some of you may have heard of. We are in that organization with Estes Park, Fort Collins, and Loveland. Together, we have about 1,200 megawatts of capacity and a 700 megawatt peak. Something interesting is, or something aggressive, I should say, is that we have a 100% renewable electric energy supply by 2030. That's something the city of Longmont has adopted, as well as Platte River has a carbon-free goal by 2030. And we also have some of the lowest electrical rates in Colorado. So we have, I think, within the top 5 lowest rates in Colorado, which can make return on investment very difficult for some residents to invest in solar. We're seeing really an uptick in kind of, what we say, early adoption in solar, but we know a lot of our folks are being left out of that transition, and we want to make sure we look at equity and just transition in our energy. We've seen about a 50% increase in our local solar installation from 3 to 6 megawatts from 2021 to 2022. And we sell about 7,400 megawatt hours of energy through a renewable power purchase program we run with the other owner cities that comes from a wind farm up in Wyoming. Next slide, please. So Tim has all these great slides. I'll say basically ditto to most of what Tim said in terms of trying to state our goals and objectives for our community solar project as we're working through it. But we're, again, at the very early stages of trying to find site selection and define the different program design elements we would like here in the city to achieve our goals. I will speak a little bit later in terms of what we have chosen as some of our program design elements and siting, but right now I want to kind of talk about just the overarching goals we have that have led us to pursue funding and constructing a community solar project here in the city. We have a 2016 sustainability plan, it was updated in 2018. We have 2018 is when our 100% renewable energy resolution was adopted by City Council, and it specifies that we need to provide affordable energy to our most vulnerable residents, which is a big focus of mine here in my position. We have a climate emergency resolution, as well as a recommendation report that came out of that resolution, all largely centering equity as a key component of integrating climate actions. So we are, again, I'll speak to it a little bit later, but we are really focusing, just like Tim, on kind of serving those low income residents and being able to provide them a fairly substantial discount, or as much as we can, on their energy bill to help offset some of their cost burden and energy burden, but also help them participate in the transition to clean energy. So I think that's all I have for now, but I will be back a little later to talk more about it.
Great, thanks, you too. So we will hear from them again momentarily. I just was going to share a couple of slides, general slides about site selection. And really in this course, we won't focus a lot on site selection, mostly because it is something that is not specific to community solar. It is a topic, of course, for solar in general, but we wanted to touch on it since it is one of the first things you'll have to tackle when you're choosing to move towards a community solar program. So next slide, please. It highlights some considerations for ground mount solar, and there's some resources linked here for that you can use once we send out the slides. We will be sending out the slides, of course, after the course, and you'll be able to click on these, but really just some considerations. If you're looking at a ground mount system, of course, you need to identify who the authority having jurisdiction is over the site, and consulting all of the maps and site plans that are available for the site itself that is under consideration. Conducting a complete survey of the proposed site conditions, the zoning, looking at regional or area plans, any kind of plans, transportation plans that you can find that relate to that area. And there's a link there for some resources. Conducting a soil survey, simply because different soil types are going to have different requirements for your drilling and for a ground mount system. Checking for critical habitats and wetlands and historical designations, cultural designations, anything like that. Some resources there for identifying the site that you're looking at, what might be relevant, and determining the floodplain status. So that's really basic, but it can maybe point you in the right direction if you haven't developed a ground mount solar system in the past. The next slide really does the same thing, just lists a few consideration for roof mount solar. Of course, considering building and roof orientation, I'll just throw in there that we're seeing more and more often systems that are designed to be part of the system will be west facing on the western facing roof in order to catch some of that later afternoon sun to address some load peaks in the late afternoons. Looking at the roof pitch, any shading, making sure the roof doesn't need reinforcements for the load of the solar system. Looking at the ages and the warranties, insurance requirements and codes, all of that, pretty standard. Any kinds of considerations for placing the inverters or the electrical panels, things like that, and of course aesthetics. So these are really basic considerations, but they are going to take time, and sometimes you're going to run into hiccups. You may choose a site, you may think you're going to move forward with that site, and then as you get into the details of some of these considerations, you'll find that, yeah, that site's not going to work out for one reason or another. Hannah is dealing with that right now, I believe. And so before you get too excited about one place, definitely be thinking about these different considerations. So again, I'm going to pass it off to Austin and Longmont so they can really give you some very concrete examples about their experience with siting.
So I think Tim did have some things to add in the section under citing, but I don't believe he has any slides, but I'll go ahead and go first. So here in Longmont, Joyce alluded to that we are struggling with our solar siting. As she mentioned, there's a lot of considerations. This is not my first time having to find solar sites for municipal or government owned organization, and it's kind of adaptability is the name of the game. Kind of being willing to pivot, to be, not too stringent in your approach to things, because with us, part of our great part is we're the authority having jurisdiction. We do the permitting, we're the utility, we are the city, we own the building. So all of those things are fairly easy. We're going to do our own community solar programming, subscriptions, rate setting. So a lot of the aspects of that other folks are going to run into with their solar siting, we don't necessarily have those, but we do have the issue of that we are an older town, older structures. Our city facilities are not new. We don't build a whole lot of new facilities, and land is very, very expensive. So we don't have a lot of opportunity for land mounted ones. So, or ground mounted, I'm sorry. So to get into the specifics of our process. So before I began here at the utility, the city commissioned a solar feasibility study in 2019. 8 sites were identified as options. There was a few roof mounted, a couple ground mounted, and actually a photovoltaic site at our water treatment plant, which is something we're still keeping in mind. Another unique thing, as I mentioned, is that we have, because we're not partnering with an outside organization other than to construct the solar, we are just dedicating capital improvement funds to pay for the solar system outright. It is something that allows us to set rates and have a return on investment that is just a little bit different than some other finance systems and or power purchase agreement systems where you have to meet certain parameters. We're hoping by having CIP dedicated funding, it allows us to do some more of that kind of equity low income outreach that we're hoping to do without so much concern on financial returns. As you could imagine, in 2020, the whole solar feasibility siting process stalled due to COVID and staff capacity. When I came on board a little over a year ago, sites had been further at those 8 sites, I'm sorry, have been further identified and refined to top 3 sites based on economic, but also non-energy benefits. So whether there was an opportunity to reach low income folks, affordable housing, things like that. Originally, Roosevelt Pavilion, this nice building you're seeing here on the top right, a very prominent building in the middle of a very nice park here downtown, was the top choice. Just a small 75 kW system. We had anticipated if that was where we went, we would get about 20 subscriptions from that energy based on our customers' average usage. Structural engineering concerns, maybe 6 to 8 months ago, kind of halted the progress on that site. Something I'd be willing to say is that even the perception of structural engineering concerns or land use conflicts can become an issue. So even if it's something you can technically overcome, oftentimes with city-owned facilities and land, there is some baggage and institutional knowledge about these sites that can make it a little tricky to navigate. We are pivoting to an alternative. We are seeking leadership approval and facility buy-in for 300 kW system. It's on a industrial type facility in the city and kind of our wastewater treatment waste services campus. Was originally identified as a behind the meter installation. So they were going to offtake all of it and offset their very substantial energy, but we are trying to work with them to consider it as a solar host community site. And that would allow us to use our CIP financing to put solar on their roof. That is solar ready and does not have a budget to put it in. And it would help us, or would allow us, to maximize Inflation Reduction Act adders, IRA adders. So in addition to the 30% direct pay, we'd anticipate 10 to 20% adder for serving low income residents and being in a low income neighborhood as well. And I think that's the end of my citing, and I think Tim might have a couple things to say.
You did have a couple of questions, Hannah.
Oh yeah, of course.
Bill was asking, does Austin or Longmont allocate any costs to the site, the cost of land allocated to the community solar costs?
I can speak for Austin real quick. We do not, because the sites that we've selected were municipally owned already. So we've got the top of a parking garage at the airport, which is a municipal department at Austin. And then we have a area that was adjacent to a substation that used to be an old tank farm. So that land didn't have any potential other uses. So we used that, and then the rooftop of the community center. So for us, we didn't have to do that. But I would say if we did have a project that had a hosting cost, we would include that into the cost of the project and consider that in our portfolio.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Same here. For these projects, everything would be municipally owned, including our land if we were to do a ground mounted site. So there would be no costs incorporated. But yes, if there was cost, things like O&M, land leases, if you're in a private agreement. So my previous job, we had to enter into a lease agreement with the solar vendor, and that needed to be kind of factored into the overall cost. So that is something to consider. And then I see there's another question I will do my best to answer. So there's structural concerns on this specific building, but happens on other buildings too. The Roosevelt Pavilion specifically, because it's a pre-manufactured steel building. And when I came on board, it had been identified, but no one had building plans for it. We didn't know what the load was. We didn't know what the wind factor was, or the snow load was. So to your question, Charles, no, solar panels aren't that heavy, but they do add a certain pound per square foot. They also have to meet snow load and wind load for your specific jurisdiction. And for pre-existing buildings, so Roosevelt's one of them, and some other sites we've looked at related to affordable housing, they were not built with any kind of wiggle room in their load calculations. Normally, kind of normal buildings are built with a little extra wiggle room in their structural engineering so that you can add rooftop units, appurtenances, things on the top of your roof, more layers of shingles, things like that. But when it comes to kind of prefabrication buildings like this, it can be a bit of a challenge. I actually did work out a system of kind of racking it and spreading the load to the columns instead of bolting it directly to the roof, which seemed to be an acceptable solution. But in this particular case, there ended up being some concrete issues and some shifting and buckling of the concrete. And it was just determined that we didn't want to invest a 25-year system on a building that may need to be replaced.
Great answers. Tim, did you have something you'd like to add on siting specific to Longmont?
to Austin rather. Yeah. So the site that we had that was most challenging was the ground mount system that's located by a substation. And we had quite a few challenges with it, actually. There were some heritage trees that are protected by the city. So we had to, work through that process. There was a wet weather creek that went through there that had invertebrates in it, and that was something that we had to consider and, make sure that we had proper remediations in place through construction. The community was jumping the fence and walking through that property and then under the highway there as a shortcut to get to school. And that was a huge thing. The community did not want to stop doing that. Otherwise, if they had to walk around, it was like an extra mile for their kids to walk to school. And so we had special considerations with the community for that. And then also impervious cover was an issue. And so we had to kind of fight a battle there. At the beginning, they were considering it 100% impervious cover. And so we argued that and got them down to 50% impervious cover. And so that was a challenge. I mean, we should have done more research, honestly, before we engaged in this project, but we learned a lot as we went along. But another thing was that it wasn't zoned correctly. So we had to rezone the site. So those were some of our challenges just for that ground mounted system. And so, I think if you have a lot of options, then you should definitely do a lot of consideration up front to save you the headaches in the back end.
Thanks, Tim. I think it's really interesting to hear the example about the kids walking to school through that area. And it just points to the need to really talk to the community about what your thoughts are and what your plans are. And if there's any way to mitigate their needs and concerns, maybe even making things better for everybody by having those conversations up front. Yeah, and I see a question here about Hannah mentioning the 25-year contract period. And yeah, we are seeing in the past, the lifetime of a system was generally considered to be about 20 years. We always knew that the systems probably are going to last longer than that, but 20 years used to be the standard. That has increased to 25 years as we get more data about the actual lifetimes of these systems. I've seen even assumptions of 30 years a lifetime. Of course, you are going to have degradation. So you have to assume less generation after that, year 20, you're not going to get nearly as much as you did in year 5, but we do anticipate these systems to last up to 30 years or more. Of course, you could repower them if you wanted to. We have in extreme locations, we have seen systems be damaged by things like hurricanes. But they are very hardy, and I think you can feel pretty safe assuming a 25-year lifetime. Of course, the inverter will need to be replaced at some point in there. Let's see.
You mentioned inverter. I was mentioning the inverter. So you mentioned.
There we go. Yeah.
I was going to say, I was using 25 years. Bill, you're right. My last contract, I worked on a PPA for several sites at my last job, about a dozen sites, and those were all 20-year contracts, but then they became our systems and we kind of assumed they would keep working after that. But I would say that the kind of inverter warranty performance communications technology can be one of the challenges. And I was recently told by somebody to just buy a bunch of extra inverters for the system that I buy and keep them in a closet.
Yeah, or plan to buy one 10 years down the road, 10 or 15.
Yeah, or one that the problem is that a lot of times the same technology is not available necessarily. So kind of planning ahead But yeah, thank you, Joyce. That was a great answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. At this point, we are going to dive into the program design elements. And this is going to be kind of the most lengthy portion of me just talking and explaining things. So feel free to post comments or questions as we go along, and I'll try to pause to answer any of those as we go along, but we're going to go through a whole handful of different elements that make up a community solar program and the options for selecting amongst all of these different program design elements, just the different options that you can choose between. So let's advance to the next slide and we'll dive right in. This is a list of the 10 program design elements that we're going to look at in some level of detail. It includes things like whether you have anchor tenants, who's eligible to participate in your program, how you're going to treat recs, how you design subscriptions, how you design all of the entry and exit rules and transferring subscriptions, all of those details, the how you credit customers for their subscription, for the power that comes from the system. And so these are the details of designing the program and making it work on a day-to-day basis. So let's dive into the first one, which is anchor tenants. Anchor tenants is a term that you may or may not have run across, but I think you'll understand what I mean after we talk about it. It's a large customer that can subscribe to your community solar project, and they may subscribe for a pretty large chunk of the subscriptions, and they really serve as an anchor or a level of certain. They provide a level of certainty to your income as a large subscriber. So that this anchor may be a local business or a franchise with a large electricity demand. It may be a municipal building or the city itself, perhaps a school system in your area. It might be a nonprofit organization that really has a strong local presence that wants to put itself out there as a supporter of the community solar project and help you maybe even with advertising and customer acquisition. So these anchors can potentially be useful because they do provide this revenue certainty. They basically are promising you that we are going to be a part of this project for a duration. We're not going to be a residential customer that may be coming in and out. We're going to provide some certainty. They're going to potentially reduce financing costs if that's a concern. They can help you with customer acquisition, and reduce customer acquisition costs by taking a portion of the subscriptions. And really, they can be, like I said, kind of an advertiser, helping you advertise the project. One consideration, the last bullet here, is that they can potentially impact whether or not the project is representative of the customer base. And what that means is if you're wanting this community solar project to really be representative of what your community looks like, the subscribers be representative of what your community looks like, the anchor tenants may help you do that, or they may hinder you in creating a representative sample of your community in your project. So that's just one consideration if that's a goal of yours. Programs, let's go back real quick. I want to touch on that green box there. So programs you can set a limit to the subscriptions held by the anchor tenants. And some state programs do limit the capacity that can be held by anchor tenants. It's not something that you probably would be subject to. If your state does have one of those limits as a municipal utility, you're unlikely to be required to adhere to those state requirements, but it's just something to be aware of, that some states do limit capacity in order to allow more subscriptions to be available to residential customers. So the next element is customer classes. And it's just basically who are you going to allow to be eligible to participate? So it's related to the anchor tenants. Some programs prioritize having a participant mix that reflects the customer mix of the utility. Like I said, that may or may not be a goal of yours. And many programs do include carve-outs for low and moderate income participation. Typically, that would be a % of the project that's set aside for LMI subscribers. And this really does have an impact on the financials of the project. And we are going to go into that, looking at the financials of a project and determining how different customer classes can impact your cash flow. We're going to be looking at that in some level of detail tomorrow. But just to say up front that these eligibilities and these carve-outs are an important thing to think about as you're designing your program. The choices that you make about this participant mix and who's eligible will inform some of your other design elements that we're going to look at, including subscription minimums and maximums, term limits and exit rules, upfront fees, monthly payment structures. Again, it's all about the cash flow, and some of these elements do interact with one another. Some proven practices that we like to highlight is to allow everyone to participate. Of course, having an LMI carve out is also a suggested practice, and ensuring that there is a cost savings for those low and moderate income customers is something that the National Community Partnership certainly encourages. The goal of NCSP is that subscribers have about a 20% bill savings. So of course, Tim described how some of the market class customers were paying a premium so that the savings then could be passed on to low and moderate income customers. We understand that not every utility is going to make the same choice about how to handle the subscription costs for different customer classes. We've heard that in some municipal utilities that there's a very strong desire to treat everyone equally, and that you can't sort of charge one more than the other. That's something that you're going to have to decide within your utility how you want to handle differences between customer classes. So let's move on to the next one, which is RECs, and how you're going to handle the environmental attributes of the project. So RECs, of course, can either be retained by you, the utility, or the administrator of the project for your own use and your own claims. They can be retired on behalf of the subscriber, or they can be provided to the subscriber. And in general, providing RECs to a residential customer is really not a great idea. They probably wouldn't know what to do with them or what they're all about. But some anchor tenants might be interested in the RECs. So that's a conversation that you probably should consider having if you do engage a large anchor tenant, as to whether they have a preference to receive the RECs or not, the renewable energy credits or not. Let's see, in case this is probably just a refresher on RECs, but it's pretty important to understand that the renewable energy certificates are they represent the environmental attributes of the solar that's been generated. So if you separate the renewable energy credit from the power, then the person receiving the power actually can't claim the green benefits of that. To a residential customer, that's unlikely to matter. They probably don't care. But again, to a larger commercial customer that may be trying to meet particular renewables goals, they might care. So again, it's just something to be aware of and something to try to state clearly in any documentation that you pass on to your customers or subscribers. Let's see, I'm seeing a question here. I get how an individual homeowner can benefit from having solar panels on his or her roof, but how does the community solar subscriber benefit? It must be more than simply feeling good. So we do encourage a cost savings if possible to the subscriber of the community solar project. And we'll look at cash flow in detail tomorrow about how that could potentially occur. But basically, if you're constructing the solar project and the power coming out of it, you're able to provide through your subscription to the subscriber for less than what they're paying for the grid power, then they're going to get a savings. If not, then they're not going to get a savings. Again, we'll look at cash flow in more detail tomorrow, but that's the basic answer. I understand it's not really a complete answer, but and then kind of connected to that with the RECs, if you are able to sell the RECs, then of course that can be included in your cash flow. So the next design element is the subscription limits. So you can either have maximums, subscription maximums, or minimums. So the subscription maximums can limit the participation of a single customer based on a number of different things, depending on how you want to design it. A lot of programs will limit the amount of subscription to about 100% or so of the customer's load based on the previous year's bill. That's pretty standard. There are a number of states that even have policies. I think Oregon is one of them that says that you can't sell more than 100% of the person's load to them, and so there's some requirements there in some cases. Or you may have some kind of a maximum based on the capacity of the project itself, because you want to be able to provide subscriptions to 50 customers or something. You may have a goal about how many customers you're able to provide subscriptions to. And so you may limit how much an individual can subscribe to based on that desire to serve more customers. So you may not actually be able to let them subscribe to 100% of their load. And then there's the subscription minimum. And this is really a lot about administrative costs to you, probably as the administrator of the program. You may want to say, well, we really can't administratively deal with somebody who only wants to subscribe to some very, very minimum amount of power. So you may say, oh, it's a 1 kilowatt minimum or something like that. And it has to do with your own costs. One caution is just to be careful, because apartment dwellers or folks with very low income may want to participate, but they may need to just be have a very small subscription. And so it's a good idea to keep that in mind as you're describing what your minimums are. Again, there are 10 states that have a requirement that no more than 40% of a project's generation can be attributed to one subscriber. And that's really just to make sure that lots of people can enroll. So let's move on. So this one is about how you're going to deal with any unsubscribed energy from the project. So people come and go. There may be a point at which there's not enough subscribers to take all of the energy. So that energy either can be marketed to a flexible subscriber, such as an anchor tenant that has a very large load and is willing to soak up the extra unsubscribed energy. So this this technique is nice because you don't have any energy that's unallocated in any particular month. The project economics are easier because there's very low risk. You're always going to have somebody to take that energy and pay for it. It might be a little more complex administratively to reallocate subscription sizes for an anchor tenant and credits and things, but I think it's probably doable with today's systems to track administratively. But you may have trouble finding a subscriber that's willing to be flexible in this way. It just depends on your situation, of course. The other option is that the unsubscribed energy is simply absorbed by the utility and sent to the grid, just like just with the rest of the energy that you that you generate. So really, that's very easy. It's easy to manage the subscriptions because nothing is changing from customer to customer, month to month. It doesn't require you to have an anchor tenant or a flexible subscriber. And really, the wholesale rate that's paid for the unsubscribed energy is likely to be lower than the subscription payment. So you have to consider that in calculating your financials and your cash flow. You have to realize that if you do have a significant amount of unsubscribed energy, that's going to impact your cash flow. So some choices there. So the next slide, please. So the next one is term limits, exit rules, and transferability. This is just really how you handle when customers come and go. We have some best practices here. Term limits set the minimum time that a subscriber is required to have their subscription. And I've seen everything from you can come in and out of it whenever you want, all the way to you are required to hold your subscription for 5 years or something. Really, a proven practice is that a multi-year agreement is really challenging for people, and you're going to have some customer acquisition problems if you make your term limit too long, because people come and go a lot these days. And especially low and moderate income customers, they just don't want to sign up for anything that they can't get out of easily. So it's really important to try to make it easy for the customers to come and go. I think you're going to have a lot easier time with customer acquisition if you go with the month to month or the you can leave anytime you want kind of term limit. Exit rules is also related, but more about whether you are going to require a fee for ending before a term limit. And how they provide notice and how early they have to provide notice that they want to exit the subscription. Transferability is about whether or not you're allowing subscribers to transfer their subscription to a different utility account if they move house within the territory, and if they are moving out of the territory or they don't want to transfer their subscription to a new location. For instance, they're moving to a house that already has solar, then you can have different ways of then transferring it to a different customer. For instance, you might have a wait list and you just pick the next person on the wait list, or they may even be able to designate who they want to transfer their subscription to. For instance, if the wait list is very long, then there's some choices to be made there. It depends on how successful your program is. So really the proven practice is allowing folks to transfer subscriptions, not having a cancellation fee, and using a very short-term limit. So the next one is how you charge folks for their subscriptions. So there's a couple of different elements that you can use to charge. One of them is the upfront fee. So you can charge there are programs in the past that have used full upfront payment. And this is a challenging one for low and moderate income customers, because basically you're asking someone to pay upfront for electricity for the next 10 years or something like that, which is really hard for most people to wrap their head around, but it has been done in the past. And it allows folks to sort of lock in a rate per kilowatt hour for a certain amount of time. The more common option these days is to have a small upfront payment that's then combined with monthly payments. So the upfront payment, it can give you a little extra funds up front to start your program off, to get it rolling administratively, maybe pay down some of the debt on the construction of the project if need be. It also has the effect of maybe attracting more serious subscribers that are really all in. However, it can be definitely a hindrance to a lot of potential subscribers. And so I would encourage everyone to think very carefully about charging an upfront fee to enter a subscription agreement. And if you don't absolutely need it for your own cash flow purposes, it's maybe not the best proven practice, because it very well could inhibit participation by low-income customers. So next slide, please. This is some of what I just said. I forgot I had it on a slide. So it can also increase customer acquisition costs for you, because you'll have to find those folks who are willing to pay the upfront fee. So in existing programs down here in this green text box, we show that the upfront fees for existing programs, and this was as of a year or so ago, were ranging from between about $75 and $325. That's a pretty significant upfront fee, $325. So it is going to have an impact on who decides to sign up. So these monthly payments then are very common in the more recent program designs. And there's a number of different ways that you can structure these monthly payments. One is on a capacity-based payment. So it's a dollar per kilowatt. You can divide your community solar project up. Say you had a 10 kilowatt project, you divide it up and sell them in 1 kilowatt chunks, something like that. So really the dollar per kilowatt rate is set and fixed for the whole life of the project. And it results in a really consistent payment for the subscribers every month. They know what they're going to pay every month. But the generation that they get out of their kilowatt that they've subscribed to changes. And so you just have to convey that to the subscriber. Of course, you can make adjustments to the price if you choose to do so, to take into account things like maintenance costs, operations maintenance costs, things like that. You're probably gonna, in your cash flow, you're going to anticipate having to change your inverters out, things like that, and you'll spread that cost over the whole lifetime of the program. But if there are any unanticipated maintenance costs, you could choose a varying price that you could choose that in the contract. You would say this price can vary up and down by a certain percentage or something like that, to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room on the subscription. But in general, the subscription price is going to be something that they can anticipate and know what they're going to be paying every month. The next option for a monthly payment is, of course, a kilowatt hour, a generation-based payment, where the kilowatt hour rate is set and never increases, or that the kilowatt hour rate changes maybe annually. So you make adjustments to account for changes in maintenance costs or administrative costs over time. So generally, either you'll have this fixed kilowatt hour, cent per kilowatt hour price, or you'll state that you're going to revisit the kilowatt hour rate every year, every 5 years, whatever you end up deciding on. But of course, a good practice is to give them as much certainty as you can about when they sign up, about what they're going to be paying for their subscription. And again, we'll go into how you can explore some of these financials tomorrow with our model. We have a model, system advisor model, that we're going to introduce you to, that can be used to look at the details of all of this cash flow. So next slide, please. So some of the considerations here, the fixed monthly payments, of course, provide some cost stability and predictability. It's really easy to talk about to your potential subscribers, good marketing, not sensitive to retail rate changes, so the subscription isn't going to change no matter what happens with retail rates. That's a really easy thing for people to sign on to. And it may or may not be a cost premium or a cost savings in the beginning. Although if retail rates go up, which they typically do, then eventually it may be a cost savings to someone. So even if they aren't getting a savings in year 1, they may get a savings in year 5. But it may or may not be a cost savings or a cost premium, depending on a lot of different factors. So the next slide is the considerations for variable monthly payments. Again, a little bit more complicated to explain to folks, but you can hedge against retail rate changes year after year. You can ensure that the subscription cost is always less than the retail rate cost. So that's something that folks are going to have an easier time to sign up for. Like, well, maybe the subscription price will increase, but I will always be paying less than the retail rate. And yeah, it can be used to guarantee a savings for subscribers while making sure that you as the utility are still recovering costs on O&M, and you can plan it. You can plan the cash flow. Next slide, please. So now, so that was about how the customers are paying you. This is about how the customers are getting credited. So there's a number of different ways that you can provide credits for the subscription. The first being a generation-based subscription. So these are defined, the subscriptions are defined for a block of kilowatt hours per month or per year, however you want to set it up. And the credits are distributed monthly, either as a fixed number of kilowatt hours or a variable number of kilowatt hours based on the customer's electricity consumption. So there's some, of course, because of the variability of the solar generation coming from the system and the degradation over time and everything, the number of subscriptions that you sell need to be calculated conservatively, because you're going to have a variable generation from the system. And if you have a generation-based subscription design, you have to be sure that you have enough generation to cover what you've sold, the subscriptions that you've sold. So you may upfront need to keep a portion of the project unsubscribed in order to ensure that you're always able to deliver what you've sold in subscriptions. So that's a consideration when you do the generation-based subscription design. You can also choose a capacity-based subscription design where the subscription is for a set capacity. Here's your 1 kilowatt, and they get a varying number of kilowatt hours credited to their bill based on whatever happened that month. If it was cloudy that month, they get less. If it was sunny that month, they get more. It's something that you just have to explain to the customer when they subscribe, that in July, you're probably going to see more credits on your bill than you're going to see in January or something like that. So this is a pretty common model of bill crediting, is that they're not credited the same number of kilowatt hours every month. I'm going to push forward and then we'll go to questions. I see a long question that I'll have to digest. So this really is starting to wrap up this rather lengthy section on the different design elements. Let's see. Well, we have a couple more slides on it, but really this data is from 2020, I believe. But at that point, about 80% of the projects had a positive net present value for residential subscribers. And what that means is that customers were saving money by subscribing to these community solar projects. They were paying less than they were on the retail rate by signing up for these programs. That's really exciting to us. And it's not necessarily what you would imagine when you're first embarking on this community solar journey as a utility. You're most likely scratching your head saying, how in the world can we make this pencil out for people? But in a lot of cases, it ends up penciling out. In some, it does not, it's true. But in a lot of cases it does. And we'd love to help you figure out how to make it pencil out for your subscribers, for the utility and for the subscribers. So there's a lot of different ways that utilities have made it a positive investment for subscribers, a lot of different ways that they've structured the payments and the credits. And so it's worth some exploration because every single case is different depending on the retail rates that you have in your area, depending on the solar installation where you are, whether you're in Maine or Florida. And so a lot of factors are at play, but we would love to help you figure out how to make it pencil for your subscribers so that they're not paying a premium. Next slide, please. So this is just a note about expanding your program. So when you first start out, you may just have one project. And so you have a project-based program. It's just one project. And you're making decisions for that one project. But as you expand your portfolio and you have more and more projects, you need to make a decision about how to handle the expansions. Are you going to make the same, does every project have the same elements? Do you handle everything the same for every project, or do you combine all the projects into a portfolio and change the economics based on the portfolio instead of each individual project? And it's really important because if you have early adopters that subscribe to your very first community solar project, and maybe it was a little more expensive because it was a smaller project and you were just getting going, are you going to continue to charge those early adopters the same subscription price 15 years down the line when now you have 5 or 7 different projects and the economies of scale, everything got cheaper and you got better at this? And so when do you adjust? When do you shift from it being a subscription to this individual project versus a subscription to the portfolio itself? And in Austin Energy, I want Tim to speak to how they decided to move to a portfolio-based program where they combine all of their projects and the financials for all of their projects into one program, one subscription cost and one program cost, because he was really the one that clued me in that this was something that we need to think about as we continue to expand. So Tim, you want to speak to this from your perspective?
Sure. So the idea is that, as we move forward and hopefully include additional lower cost projects into the portfolio, then the overall portfolio costs go down. And that would allow us to take the locked in subscriptions that our customers have for 15 years and potentially lower that price further as the portfolio costs, on average go down. So that's our approach. I think it keeps people engaged and a bit excited about the opportunities that could arise from that. And then also, as part of that, if by chance we're unable to reduce the community solar portfolio costs, then those customers are locked in and they'll not see a negative impact from that.
Great, thanks. Okay, so the very last, the last couple of slides here, and then I want to move us into, I want to get us into our breakout groups pretty shortly, but can you switch us to the next slide? Oh yeah, the summary slide here. Yeah, the summary slide basically is just summarizing everything that I said about upfront fees and flexible exit rules and all of that. Let's continue to the next slide where I'm just showing, and I'm not going to go into detail here, but you can look back at it if you want to, but I'm just showing here how these different design elements across the top that we just went through, that each of them has an impact on goals of your program. So for instance, if your big goal is to encourage LMI access to solar, you need to think carefully about which customer classes you're targeting and your subscription minimums and maximums and your upfront fees and how you do your monthly payments, whether they're fixed or floating. So this chart just gives you a little indication of how these different design elements are going to impact the goals of your program and whether or not you're able to meet those goals. So I just wanted to point that out to show you that that's why all of these elements matter. So yeah, we're going to give Hannah a few moments to talk about how they chose the different design elements. She's just gone through this process herself. And after that, we're going to go into some breakout groups.
Thanks, Joyce. Yeah, I'll try and cover this pretty quickly. I'm going to take a moment first to just kind of take this opportunity to plug the NCSP NREL technical assistance to the municipal utility workbook. When I came into my position, we had kind of worked through the workshop and the workbook just got released, and partnering with Joyce and her team and kind of going through it with them has really helped me understand kind of what the choices are and what choices to make based on best practices. So I want to give a plug for their technical assistance. It was very easy to apply for and receive. So, and Joyce has been lovely to work with. So as many of you probably feel right now, it can be a little overwhelming when you're facing all of these, forks in the road decisions. How do I kind of meet our ultimate goal with all these different program factors? So I attempted to take everything Joyce just covered and everything we're about to cover in our worksheet and put it into kind of a table covering what I like to call like the 10 commandments of community solar based on what Joyce kind of started with. You can see here, we're trying to split our program into two customer classes. So we want to serve low moderate income residents, but we also want to serve market rate residential. We do not intend to include commercial customers, similar to Austin at this time. We're going to do a fixed subscription rate that you're always going to, or not always, but they're going to get a consistent 10% discount off of their KWH for LMI, and they're going to pay a consistent premium on their KWH for market rate. We're hoping for a 10% discount and 10% premium to offset, but based on best practices, would like to get that to a 20% discount if we can, but see how numbers work out. And then you'll see we're treating our customer classes a little bit differently than one another based on best practices to limit barriers to LMI participation, but also to provide some program stability. It's a little difficult, we think, to add, like, everybody can do month-to-month leases and there's not really a buy-in, there's not a lot of stability because it doesn't help our program kind of ride the waves. So our intention is to charge no upfront fee to LMI, $50 to $100 for market rate. For reoccurring fees, we intend to charge nothing on an annual basis to LMI residents and a nominal $10 to $20 fee for market rate residents. The terms and the lengths of the subscriptions are different month to month with 30-day notice for LMI customers, 6 to 12 month terms with a little bit more notice. I didn't put it in there, probably still 30 days notice, but a longer term. Anchor tenant, we do not intend to have one, but I do have an asterisk there. We are proposing to essentially give our host facility somewhere around 10% of the production fee free to their bill based on how much 10% generates on a monthly basis, somewhere between 5 to 10% as a energy offset and kind of in lieu of a lease payment for the use of their roof. We are going to use maximums. We're not going to use minimums based on our system size. So we have 300 kW and we want to serve 50 residents or whatever it is, slice that, and that would be the maximum we allow people to subscribe to. We will not have minimums because we do expect low income apartment dwellers, mobile homes, condos, perhaps to come through the program. We don't want to keep them out with a minimum. We don't have any fee, kind of exit fee, and we don't think we're going to allow for kind of transfer. You can transfer it with you within the service territory, but not to another customer. We're just going to reabsorb it, probably go to the wait list and move on. Unsubscribed energy is something we didn't give a lot of thought to. I hadn't put a lot of thought into until working through the technical assistance with Joyce, but after working through it, we're going to absorb our unsubscribed energy as the utility. We just have other uses for it. So we will just absorb it and not kind of pass along the burden to anyone else. We're going to retain our RECs, which is pretty common in the residential program, but specifically because we're allowed a 1% local generation under our power supply agreement with Platte River, which allows about 2 megawatts of local generation, which we'd like to dedicate most, if not all of that, to community solar. And this is just our toe in the water. And then lastly, I know this still says TBD for generation versus capacity versus generation base, but this is being narrowed down that we believe we're going to subscribe folks in KW, credit them in KWH, and do it in a generation base. So they will get more credit in the summer, less credit in the fall and winter. So that is our intention, is to do the generation base, but that will also be determined. So I hope you find this helpful. I know Joyce is going to go into the worksheet and there's a lot of detail there, but this is kind of a nice matrix with all the things we're considering in one screen. So hope that's helpful. So back to you, Joyce. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So the worksheet. So I hope you all received the email with the link to the worksheet. It is a PDF. I don't know if you can see it here, but it's a PDF, a packet that basically walks you through all of these design elements and says what I said in brief, and gives you a place to take notes for yourself of how you think you would design your own program. And in the end of it all, when you work through the whole thing, the idea is that you have a draft program design that you can then shop out to people in your utility, that you can use it just as a discussion piece. It can help you really hone in on the different elements and how you would choose from the different options. So this worksheet is for you to use the way you want to use it.
We'll get started. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Paul Zuma with APPA. Thank you for joining today's part 2 of the Community Solar Program and Subscription Design virtual course. Just a couple of quick reminders before we get started. We'll run until 2 p.m. Eastern today with a quick 5-minute break around 12:50 or so. Thanks to those who have filled out the evaluation part 1. There were some good comments and feedback included in there. We'll send a link for the full course evaluation today, which is the one that's required to get continuing education credit. So please take a few minutes to fill that out and provide feedback. We'll paste it into the chat box towards the end of the class, and you'll also receive it in a follow-up email that will go out this afternoon. And please continue to use the chat box to type your questions and comments in today, or you can raise your hand if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask a question out loud. We want to keep this conversation going. So now I'll hand it over to Joyce to get us all started for today.
Great, thanks, Paul. So if you can go to the next slide, please. We'll just go through the agenda for today. Today, the premise for today really is to understand and talk about how all of these program design elements play into the financial picture for the project. So how do we make, I know that at the top of everyone's mind is how do we make one of these projects pencil out, both from the utilities perspective and from subscribers perspective. And that's really what we're going to focus on today, with an emphasis on each design element that we talked about yesterday, things like anchor tenants, things like customer classes, and how those play with the financials of the project. So that's what we'll be diving into today. So first, we want to take a little bit of time to talk about the worksheet that we sent you away with yesterday. Hopefully you were able to spend a little bit of time with it to see what it's all about, maybe work through some of it. And so we want to set aside some time at first to go through that together, answer any questions, and maybe share some of our experiences with that worksheet. Because we do want you to be able to use it going forward. We want you to understand it, understand how to use it, and have a chance to ask questions. After that, we'll talk a little bit about the different ownership models for projects, and then dive right into how to calculate financials for your project concepts. My colleague, Simon Sandler, is going to be presenting the impact of each of the program design elements on financials using a financial modeling tool that's developed at the National Renewable Energy Lab that's called the System Advisor Model. So we'll introduce System Advisor Model, or SAM, and then he will walk through how SAM can be used to explore project financials. Then we'll hear again from Austin about how they approached their portfolio of projects, financially speaking, and then have plenty of time, hopefully, for any kind of idea sharing or questions and answers. And then, of course, we'll give you some time to take the poll that's required to get the continuing education credits. So that's today. Okay, and one more. We're just going to talk very briefly about some different ownership models and some considerations around ownership and program administration. So there's a small handful of ways that community solar projects can be designed from an ownership perspective. The utility can own the project and finance it or pay for it up front if you have that ability. You can also, of course, do a power purchase agreement and have a third party own and operate the system. And then, less relevant now, but used to be more interesting, is the partnership flip structure, where the ownership of the project transfers to the utility after a period of time where the tax credits, the investment tax credit, could be taken advantage of by some entity with a tax appetite. That is less of an issue now that the Inflation Reduction Act has made it easier for utilities to own solar projects and take advantage of the tax credit in the form of a direct payment. So the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, has a provision that allows nonprofits and entities that previously weren't able to take the investment tax credit for solar to now get a direct payment for that. Of course, there would be a bit of a delay in getting the direct payment, because there's the same kind of delay as when you get your money back after filing taxes. It takes maybe a year or so, 6 months to get that. And we anticipate a similar kind of lag, but it really changes the picture in terms of ownership options for nonprofit entities. We're not going to dive into a lot of detail about the Inflation Reduction Act and the implications of it. There's a lot of interesting details that we could go into. And if you have questions around that, including questions around the different adders that the Inflation Reduction Act has provisions for, in terms of demographic adders and places where coal plants have been closed, then we do have resources on that. And I would really encourage you to apply for technical assistance if you want. If you want to look at, in particular, where in your jurisdiction you may be eligible to receive some of those adders. We do have some resources around that, some GIS mapping tools that have mapped out some of these provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's all I want to say about that at this point. Next slide. So there's a couple of different considerations. These things don't really fit into our program design elements, but they are really important considerations that you need to think about as you're moving forward with a project. Of course, who's going to own it? Who's going to develop it first? The utility or a third party? Who's going to own and operate it? Who's going to maintain it over time? You may or may not want to do that, but it's something that you'll have to decide up front, and something that you'll have to talk about with the powers that be in your utility. And who will be handling the subscriber acquisition? There are companies, third parties, that will do subscriber acquisition for you on your behalf. And then once you have those subscribers, who's going to manage those subscribers and communicate with them and handle folks that come and go over time? Similarly, how are the payments going to be taken care of? Is that going to be something the utility does? Is it going to be on bill? Are you going to hire a third party to collect payments? Of course, we would suggest that if you can limit how many pieces of paper customers are receiving, that's ideal. So on bill payments are highly suggested if you're able to manage that. And then how will the credits appear on the bill? Of course, we just talked about trying to make that as simple as possible for customers to understand how they are receiving credits. And what do you have to do to make this happen on the bill? What kind of upgrades are needed? There's almost certainly going to be some reprogramming of your billing system that's required to do this. And we do have people that we can draw on that have gone through this process in the past. So if you get to a place where you need to make these billing system upgrades in order to show the on-bill credits or to manage customers in-house, we would be happy to work with you and connect you with people that have done it in the past that have some lessons learned on that. So that's I'm sure that Tim and Hannah can also, especially Tim, can speak to some of these considerations as well. So let's advance to the next slide, and I will give you just a very brief intro of our model, the system advisor model that was developed in-house at NREL. It's more than a decade old now, probably 2 decades old now. And it's a longstanding program that's been developed over time to look at the financials of not only solar and community solar, but a number of different technologies, wind, geothermal, and it's looking at those financials from the developer's perspective, or the system owner's perspective. So it would be from the utility's perspective. And recently we've added a community solar module to it that allows people to model the cash flow, the impact of different subscription payments and different customer classes paying different subscription amounts, if that's the way you want to design your project, and what the implication of that is on the cash flow of the project from your perspective as a utility. So let's advance to the next slide. So Sam, this is just a screenshot from Sam. It looks at the system, the technical output of the solar system, and the impact on the financials. And what it's doing in the background is running an hour-by-hour simulation of the PV system over the entire assumed lifetime of the system, given all the parameters inputs that you have. And the financial model looks at the annual cash flow. So it's a very, very detailed analysis. It has a lot of functionality. It is something that if you haven't used it before, we would suggest that you give it a try and then maybe contact the SAM team or our team to help you understand what the outputs are, what you're looking at, make sure that you've got all the inputs tweaked just right, because it's not really just a plug and play sort of financial model. It's pretty detailed, but very, very powerful. And so, but I would suggest that you reach out if you do have questions about what you're doing if you start to use it. But Simon is going to walk us through some of its functionality today. So next slide, please. One of the functions is that you can run these parametric simulations that let you do scenario analysis and such that you can look at a range of inputs and how one thing impacts how a range of inputs impacts your output. So you don't have to run over and over and over and over multiple simulations. You can just give it a range of inputs and it will automatically give you the range of outputs, which is really neat. So that's something that we would encourage you to take advantage of so that you can really hone in on the right size system, the right components, everything like that. So next slide, please. I think this is where you can download SAM. You can register on the SAM website really quickly. You can download SAM. There's a ton of videos on how to get started with it. There's reports that make great bedtime reading. But really, if you're trying to use SAM seriously, then you might end up referring to some of these reports. The videos are really great, I will say. And then there's some detailed help files that talk about every single input, every single assumption. So you can refer to those as you make your inputs and things. And then of course there's individual support. And so that's the link down there to get individual help with SAM.
So we're going to dive in here. I got about 40 minutes and I'm going to walk through some examples of SAM. And I think it's a twofold aim. One is to show you the capabilities of SAM and the modeling that you can do to help yourself and your team and your organization, but also to try and illuminate kind of the interactions of different fees and costs and how they play into the program economics. And so the goal here is to try and help you guys get a better feel for what this actually looks like economically, and how in your workbook, when you were looking at some of those decisions you were making, how that may or may not impact the outcome, right? It says, oh, great, I'd love to have an LMI group, but what does it actually mean economically or financially? So we're going to go ahead and dive in here, and let's do this. So just to start, some ground level assumptions. SAM is this model that we use, and in order to model it, we had to make some base assumptions, right? This is not going to be specific to anyone here, probably. It's not even meant to be representative of any specific entity, but more of a general model, and we're going to compare against a baseline scenario to show how those changes impact the baseline numbers. So just to give an idea of a few things that we're going to address here, right? The first thing we're going to address is 3 different customer classes, what we've termed general, anchor, and LMI. So general would just be a set of residential customers. Anchor would be what we're assuming would be a commercial customer who is an anchor tenant. And then LMI being a low and moderate income household rate customer class as well. So we're going to look at different combinations of those 3 customer classes and how that changes the economics of the projects as well as the economics to the customers. And then the other thing we're going to play with a little bit is revenue. So there's different ways to charge customers in terms of accruing revenue to the project developer. And classically, I think you would say they're kind of divided between upfront and annual payments. So an upfront payment being a payment that is made at the outset of the project or prior to even the project being built. And then annual, meaning in reality monthly payments, but the way that the model works is it's an annual model. Everything's done on an annual basis. So all of the payments that are done in a monthly are summed up to an annual. So whenever I refer to annual payments, it really means monthly payments a subscriber would make that for the developer would be, or the project owner would be accrued in an annual basis. And then of course you can do a combination of those. So we're going to look at that as well. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to lay out a very simple project example. We're lucky enough to have Hannah here, who's been giving us great stuff. And so we use Longmont, Colorado as an example of a location, but it's not meant to be representative of the project they're doing or anything like that. So we're going to go ahead and assume a 0.5 megawatt, 500 kilowatt PV system. We're going to say that's kind of a small utility scale. We're going to say it's $1 per watt. Just a number throwing out there. It's going to change for everyone. It's going to be higher, lower, whatever. But we're going to say $1 per watt, $500,000. And then we're going to say in terms of operational, these assumptions, right? To operate the system, there's kind of O&M costs on an annual basis. And we're going to say we're going to do a mix. We're going to do a 60% debt. So you're going to pay 40% of the project up front over a 20-year, 5% interest rate with a real or an effective rate that is 7.5 when you combine inflation and real discount rate, so that nominal rate. We have additional costs in the model. There's lots of stuff. I don't want to dive into these assumptions a whole heck of a lot because they're not meant to be specific. It's more about how does things change relative to the space. But we do include a base 30% ITC, which is helpful, of course, based upon hopefully being able to achieve those through the new Inflation Reduction Act direct pay methodologies. So if we hop to the next slide, I'm going to kind of outline and lay out what is the actual base case. So the base case is just a general residential subscriber class. We're going to have one class. You're going to assume 100 residential subscribers, meaning that for a 500 kW project, we're going to say they all subscribe to 5 kW each. In reality, that might vary, but this is our baseline. And we're going to go ahead and say they just pay a fixed subscription rate. It's just quote unquote annual payments. There's no upfront payments. They just pay approximately $33 a month for the life of the project. It's set. And then on the bill, the residential bill credit, so for their payment every month to that 5 kilowatt subscription, they will get credited on their electricity bill 6.5 cents per kilowatt hour from the energy generated from that 5 kilowatt portion that they've subscribed to. So if we assume this is a very simple high-level base model, it was clearly done to make numbers very pretty. You can see that the developers, the person who's building the project gets an NPV of $100,000 positive, which relates to an IRR of 20%. So nice, real simple, pretty base scenario to which to compare against. So now we're going to start playing with all those characteristics of the different customer classes and how much they pay and how much they get credited to show how that affects and change from this base scenario. So if we go to the next slide, what we're going to call, before we go to the next thing, what I want to make very clear is that all of the numbers here are based upon payment and credit. So it's very simple to see, the customer is getting a 6.5 cent kilowatt hour credit for their payment. That means they're saving money potentially. What we're not actually saying is, will they save money on their bill theoretically? Because in order to calculate that, you'd have to know the actual electricity tariff to calculate how that energy is actually credited. All we're saying is that relative from the payment they made and the credit they receive, is it to them a net positive or benefit as a financial investment? It isn't necessarily going to say that their bill will decrease this percentage or they will see a percent savings. So it doesn't say if they save money compared to their old bill. What it does tells you is basically, if you're an investor, if you think of yourself as a subscriber, as an investor, is your investment going to be reaping you a positive or a negative at the end of the day? So just want to make note, SAM doesn't include that tariff calculation for the community solar package. And so I just want to make that so no one's getting confused between the two, but I think it'll be clear as we go through. So let's go ahead and go to the first alternative scenario, as we'll call it. So scenario 2A. So in the initial case, right, we just had a standard 100 residential subscribers and the project was, profitable for the developer. Now, what if, to reduce costs, maybe for the developer or for the utility, they don't want to have to recruit 100 customers or be able to sign them up. They want to make it a smaller number. So one thing that can help reduce costs for the project is you would have the anchor tenant. You could get an anchor tenant that pays for a percent of the part of the project. So let's say we had an anchor tenant that's 30% of the project here. And so we've now reduced the number of subscribers you need to get. So the residential subscribers are still paying the same amount, but instead of all 500 kilowatts, they're now only subscribing to 350 kilowatts at 5 kilowatts each, which is 70 subscribers. And you have an anchor tenant, which, because they probably have a slightly lower rate and they're maybe capable of it, they might get pay a little bit less. So they're going to say they subscribe to that 30% of the project, and they're going to pay an annual subscription payment of $97.50 a year. And they're going to get a slightly lower credit because their rate might be, because they're bigger purchasers as a commercial tenant or client, they might get a slightly lower rate, so they might get credited at a slightly lower rate. And so since they're paying a little bit less per kilowatt, actually, that $9,750 is cheaper per year because they get a cheaper rate. We're going to see that the impact on the project is that the NPV for the developer actually goes down, right? So there's a trade-off here, right? As a project manager, you may be able to save somewhat on administrative costs because you have to manage less subscriptions. However, the developer, whoever that is, if it is the utility, might be seeing a reduced positive impact on their finances because they're going to charge their anchor tenant less because they're subscribing to a larger portion at one time. And so it's just to point out that depending on how you break it down, the numbers will change. So the anchor tenant's paying less, so the project sees a less positive NPV for the developer. What you'll notice here at the bottom is I am going to start talking about how the general subscriber value changes. It says a minus 30% from the base case in terms of its NPV. In reality, it's the same savings per customer. The NPV for customer is the same. It's only a minus 30% from the base case because you removed 30% of the customers. So that class as a whole sees a reduction that's directly related to how many customers are no longer in that class. So now if we go to 2B as a scenario, which is, hey, let's say the anchor tenant is paying a slightly different thing, right? So now we have two customer classes, just like the 2A scenario I just showed you. But instead of having the anchor tenant just pay that annual fee, we're going to shift. So they pay the exact same amount over the life of the project, but we're going to shift some of that payment to an upfront fee, right? And so this would help the developer in terms of having cash flow in the outset years, in the early years, so that it doesn't have to, maybe it's reducing risk, financial risk, because you're doing a development of a project. So what I've done here is I've said that the general residential subscribers and the anchor tenant over the life of the project will pay the exact same amount. However, the developer sees cash earlier because the anchor tenant pays part of their subscription up front and part of it over fixed through the life of it. And so what does that mean? Well, it actually means, if you look at it, that the developer has a higher NPV now, right? And that makes sense because if you think about a discounted cash flow, money in future years is worth less than money in present years. And so from a developer's perspective, having upfront fees is likely going to be beneficial to your cash flow, beneficial to reducing risk. It's going to make the project look financially more advantageous to you. The downside here is that for customers, they may not be willing to be able to bear that cost. And so that's why we've put it to an anchor tenant. We've said, oh, how about we give anchor tenants an upfront fee, because they might have a more financial bandwidth than a residential customer that can't afford an upfront fee, but can only pay ongoing as they also receive credits one-to-one, right? They're not putting cash out in the first place. Now, to note here, that is also beneficial theoretically for the subscriber, right? If a subscriber pays money up front and then receives credit over time, they're spending it. So they also have an increased NPV. But of course, that means they have to have liquid cash to pay up front. And not everyone will have that ability. So just this is a way to show that the difference between how a customer pays impacts both their own NPV as well as the project's NPV, but it's dependent upon who can bear that financial burden or risk.
Can I jump in with one comment?
Yeah.
On the scenario 2A and B? We've assumed here that the anchor tenant is paying a lower subscription rate than the residential subscriber. that assumption is just based on the fact that large commercial customers generally have a lower electricity rate per kilowatt hour. And so they're probably going to want a lower subscription rate so that they're saving money. It's feasible that you could find or identify an anchor tenant that's willing to pay higher, that's willing to pay more, and so that you wouldn't necessarily have to charge them less for the subscription. This is just the example that we've used here, but of course you can search for an anchor tenant that is willing to pay the same as a residential customer potentially. So just wanted to point
Absolutely.
that out.
And Kimberly, I see your question. I'm going to save that one till the end, because that's a great question. It's a very complex question, I'm sure, as you I'm sure know, but I'll say that one to end. We'll come back to that. But feel free to keep dropping questions in, clarification questions or larger questions, and we'll be sure to answer them. Yeah, and thank you, Joyce, for that. All right, so scenario 3. So what if we switch it up again a little bit, right? All right, so rather than an anchor tenant now, what we're going to say is the project or the program is set up so that it's a 50-50 split. We have half that are just general residential subscribers and half which are LMI residential subscribers. So they both get 50 subscriptions. They're 5 kW each, which totals, oh, that is a typo. That should be 250. Ignore that for now. Apologies. But both classes here would be paying for 5 kW subscriptions. However, we're assuming, and as was mentioned earlier, I believe by Bill, which is that one of the goals or objectives of NCSP is to have LMI customers receive at least a 20% bill savings. They'd love for all customers to receive that, but especially the LMI community. And so what we're going to say is, well, let's give LMI customers the same bill credit, right, a 6.5 cent per kilowatt for their subscription, but let's have them pay slightly less, right? We're going to have them pay $60 less per year. So that would, if you split it up amongst 12 months, you'd be paying a little bit less per month. Right, about $5. And so what does that do to the economics, right? What if we basically say the developer is going to get less money coming in the door, the utility is going to get less money coming in the door, but they're going to save the same amount? Well, unsurprisingly, you would see the NPV go down, right? So because there's a lower subscription fee, we're going to see a slightly lower NPV for the developer. It's not quite cut in half, but it is reduced significantly. And so that's what we're trying to illuminate here. Now, if we go to the next scenario, what we're going to see is, okay, well, what if you want the same number to be true, right? You want the developer to be made just as whole as that base scenario. So what we've done here is I don't want to use the word subsidized because it's a very, I think, hot word. But what we've done is we've raised the general residential subscribers payment to offset the LMI subscriber payment. And so the point here is that you see in the results that by having general residential customers pay slightly more, but receive the same credits before, the developer is back to that 100K NPV with a 20% IRR. And the project from the developer's perspective is the exact same. However, you can of course see that the LMI customer is going to get the same savings or NPV, return on their investment as scenario 3. But of course, the general subscriber class is going to see a reduction. And so I think what shows here is how sensitive the change in a subscription fee is to the individual subscriber's savings, right? So what you can see is for the general subscriber, paying $60 more a year, going up from $400 a year to $460 per year, reduces their savings 80% between scenario 3 and scenario 3A. And so I think what I really want to illuminate here is both, you can have it where you can set it, the goal to be, I want the developer to get this much money and I just have to figure out what the customer pays and how I can get them savings, but it also illuminate how sensitive a payment, subscription payment, this is to their actual quote unquote investment finances. So if you want the developer and the customer to both see savings, there is definitely a nuance to changing these numbers to the point where you go, okay, now it works out where everyone is seeing a net positive. All right, so let's go to the next one, which is a hybrid payment. So we're kind of going back to scenario 1, and we're just going to say, hey, what happens to the numbers on the project if we have back to 100 subscribers and we keep it really simple. It's just a residential program. No one else is paying. There's no, cost recovery or subsidization of any type. But we're just going to have those customers pay a part of their payment up front. So what I've done here, similar to the anchor tenant scenario, I believe that was 2B, is I've said the customer is now going to pay, rather than $400 a year, they're going to pay $380 a year. And for the money that they don't pay out, that $20 they don't pay out each year, I've converted that to an upfront fee. So they're paying the exact same amount the over life of the project. So the subscriber won't pay any more than they did before, and they're going to receive the same 6.5-cent bill credit. But like I noted, this highlights again how if you just pay a little bit up front, even $500, which maybe your residential subscriber could afford that. It's not the $60,000 that we gave to that anchor tenant, just a little bit up front. It really increases the developer's NPV, right? $500 up front from each customer increases that NPV $18,000, which makes the IRR, right? IRR is much more sensitive. It's a very large, big jump in the IRR. So a project might be a better investment compared to a different project or another way to spend money if you can get some funds up front, even if it's a small amount. I would say that, as Joyce pointed out yesterday in the, I won't say best practices, but in the materials, upfront payments can be a burden, especially for some customer classes. I think we would probably say that's very true for LMI customer classes. So being cautious about who can and cannot pay an upfront fee will dictate if you're going to get people signing up for the programs, as well as if it seems equitable to do it. So even though it might be more financially viable for the program or the project, if a customer class can't, or if customers in a customer class can't take that burden on, you may not get the adoption that you want. And so that's something to consider. All right. And so we have, I believe, one more slide here, which is, or one more scenario here, which is variable payments. So everything we've done up until this point has been what we call a fixed payment. Fixed payment being that it's set, right? The customer subscribes to 5 kilowatts and they will pay exactly for that 5 kilowatt. And so they're going to pay a set dollar per kilowatt for the subscription, whether it's upfront or whether it's ongoing through monthly or annual fees. What it doesn't consider is that the generation relative to that, their bill credit every month will change as the generation from that system changes. So you would assume in winter months they're going to get less of a bill credit, and in summer months they're going to get more of a bill credit. And that just goes with how the system operates. And so there's a slight disconnect for the subscriber. They are paying on a capacity base, but receiving on a generation base. And so it is a little bit tricky because you're projecting what the generation of the system will be, but you can't guarantee them a savings. It's going to change a little bit each month based upon how much they pay and how much generation and bill credit they receive. So an alternative way to do that is have what we call a variable subscription. Now, one of the comments made earlier today was that a fixed subscription, it gives customers a concrete knowledge of exactly what they're going to pay, which might be really helpful, right? If you make it too complex and there's changing numbers, they're going to be like, wait, what am I paying each month? That can be confusing. However, if you do have a variable subscription, you can tie it to generation. So what you could say is that the customer pays for the generation from 5 kilowatts of a system and receives a bill credit. And what this allows you to do is guarantee that the investment made by the customer is a net positive investment, right? Because if they pay 5.5 cents per kilowatt hour, but they receive a bill credit of 6.5 cents, you're saying no matter what, every single month, however much they pay, they're going to receive a net positive of 1 cent per kilowatt hour. And so this gives this floating generation payment, which is a variable subscription, right? How much they pay varies each month or annually. It allows them to know they're going to be guaranteed that it's a good investment financially, theoretically, but also they will be paying a different amount each month. And so if that's confusing or if you can't figure out messaging around that, that's kind of the downside to this. And what's nice here is that we've kind of just showed that even just guaranteeing a 1 cent saving, even though all the payments are in the out years, right? None of the payments are made up front, the project still works, right? The customer is seeing a 1 cent saving for every single kilowatt hour that they subscribe to, but the project still pencils. It's slightly better than the base case. And so I think it's just nice to see that you can do a variable subscription. it can work. It doesn't mean the project suddenly is going to not pencil or something like that. It's just a little more complex probably from the subscriber's perspective, but it does provide you a guaranteed good investment that won't change from month to month. The savings will be a net set number. So I'm going to go to the next slide, and we'll leave this slide up. This just shows you all the scenarios we laid out and all the numbers and results. So it's just kind of a matrix table of everything. I'm not going to walk through it. I'm just going to leave this up so you can review it, think about it. If you have any questions in relation to any of the scenarios I presented or other scenarios that you would like to consider or thought or what would happen, now's your time to think about it, ask it. And while you're thinking about those questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, etc. I will try and answer Kimberly's question slightly, and then I'll get on to whatever questions are also added in there. So, Kimberly, that's a great question. How do you deal with it? Everyone deals with it a little bit differently. It isn't accounted for in the models here. What I will say is that there are different approaches. Sometimes there is if the utility is the one that owns it and manages it, there's a lot of time where utilities, I think, will manage it just like they do any other customer that is falling behind on payments. So there's, there's late payment fees. Theoretically, there's all of these potential ways. I don't know that you would say you could turn off the power in this case, which is not something that we would advocate for anyways. But there are different ways to do it. The other way that I think we've seen other folks do is we've seen some states or programs implement a certain amount of money being set aside to help cover for that. So maybe some of the income is put into a little slush fund to cover for that margin if there are late payments or behind payments. And then there are other ways, which if the customer can't pay for it, you can have programs where you can transfer the credits. Or if someone can't pay for however much and they say they can no longer pay, maybe they can no longer be enrolled at some point. And so you'd be able to then get a new subscriber to take on that credit. Alternatively, I'm kind of alluding to flexible subscription programs, but if that customer can no longer pay or is no longer a part of the program, another way to be able to do that would to be have an anchor tenant that has a variable number. So if you have an anchor tenant that has a variable number, they're sometimes willing to absorb unsubscribed or unpaid areas. And so they would then pay for more, but also receive more credit potentially. But I think that the non-payment issue becomes kind of a larger question of how do you deal with it for all customers in general, not just for community solar payments in general. Was that helpful at all? Or do you have any follow-up questions, Kimberly? You're welcome to come off mute and share your thoughts or questions. All right, well, great. And feel free to reach out. I'm sure we have some resources and some folks who have dealt with that we can connect you with. If you'd like to hear exactly some of those examples, we can connect you. So feel free to reach out to the team here and we can try and put you in touch. All right, I got two more questions here right now. I got one from Tom. Do you also model in the value of the RECs? In these models, I did not account for RECs, in part because it's so variable across the country, who can and cannot, if it's a voluntary market, if it's a regulated market, it depends on what the value of the REC is, et cetera. So I don't include RECs here. The way SAM accounts for RECs is there's basically just considered a production incentive. And so you would just get a payment and you can input that into the model, no problem at all. It's very simple, and you just would get a payment for however many kilowatt is generated. Of course, those are assumed to be financially maintained or owned and compensated to the developer. So it would help the project financials overall, which you could then indirectly pass through to the customer via a lower subscription rate if you wanted. But RECs, I didn't include RECs in this model because I think it's too nefarious to put a number on it that's real and that everyone can agree upon. And it can change year to year, which can be hard. So not included in these models, absolutely can be included in SAM in the models that you would like to do if you want to play with this. Let me know if that helps. And if not, I can answer the following question and I'll address Bill's question. Let's see. From Bill, pick a case and tell me from the customer's perspective how much they save or what their investment is returning. So yeah, The customer, so saves, yeah, if we're saying saves relative to their bill, I can't answer that. But if we say relative, I forget what the NPV, we didn't put the actual NPV, we just wanted to show comparative against the base case. The NPV was positive in every single one of these scenarios for the customer. I made sure that was the case. So, yeah, so the customer always had a positive investment. So whatever they paid, whether they got that 6.5 cent credit or that 5.5 cent credit as the anchor tenant, as the commercial customer, they all had a positive investment. So the money they put in returned in those bill credits a positive to them. It varies everywhere from a very small NPV to, I think some of them were, the way Sam calculates it, Bill, is as a customer class, not as each individual subscriber. So the NPV for the whole customer class was somewhere, it ranged anywhere from like, I think 30,000 for the entire customer class up to like, 200, 250,000. So in a similar range as the developer. So they're not, but then when you break that down per customer, you have to divide however much the NPV is by the number of subscribers. So they're all seeing positive ones. So that's kind of nefarious in this one. So I don't have the number for you right now off the top of my head, Bill.
So Simon, can I ask you a question following up on that?
Go ahead.
Take your base case number one, because I'm standing up in front of the Rotary gathering, and then afterwards somebody asked me the question, right? And if you look at base case number one, the reoccurring payments equals $10,000. So the customer is making a $10,000 investment over 25 years, and they're, just like they're putting it on their roof, and they're saving 6.5 cents per kilowatt hour. You'd have to know how many kilowatt hours it's producing, but they're investing $400, and they better be making a little bit more than $400 back. Otherwise, it's like, why would I do this?
Yeah, no, they absolutely are. They are, and I can send you, if you'd like, Bill, I can send you the actual numbers, the back end, the spreadsheet it gives you out. It kicks you out the generation, right? You said it. You have to know the generation, which that's exactly what Sam does. So if you'd like, I can send you the numbers afterwards to show you for this example,
Sure.
What they are. But yes, you're paying $400 per year, and in future years, which it's worth less, of course, you're also getting more. So, but yeah, at the end of the project, the customer is seeing a net positive on all of these scenarios. None of them will they lose money from that recurring payment or those upfront payments relative to their bill credits.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Which option have the typo? Great question, Joe. It was just in the third scenario here in that middle column, LMI 3, just it said that the LMI customers were subscribing to 150 kilowatts, which is actually what the anchor tenant was. The LMI in scenario 3, the LMI and the residential customers are all, there's 50 of each, and they're all subscribing to 5 kilowatts each. So you can see here in the capacity row under the one that says plus LMI parentheses 3, it's 5 kilowatt semicolon 5 kilowatt. And that's correct. So it's just that one thing, and I can fix that before we send the slides out again. But yeah, there was nothing wrong on the calculations. It was purely just a number that had gotten copied over incorrectly. So apologies for that. Gabe asks, I thought it was kilowatt hours that matters, not kilowatt for RECs. Correct. Apologies if I misspoke. It will be, you get paid. So a production incentive. So they get paid cents or dollars per megawatt hour. Would be the model, would be the number. So yeah, you're going to be getting paid as a developer in dollars per kilowatt hour or megawatt hour for the production for RECs. That's correct. So sorry if I misspoke. What capacity factors are assuming for these cases? Location is a huge factor over the lifetime of these systems. Absolutely. So Sam calculates the capacity factor based upon the actual operations, et cetera. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what it actually came up with here. It's usually, I think this is in Longmont, Colorado. Like I said, that's just an example location. It's going to vary for your location. You have to run this model in your location again. I want to say it came up somewhere around 17 or 18, but I haven't seen a SAM capacity factor higher than like 20 or 21, which is of course fantastic if you can get it. That's what I'm thinking on top of my head. I ran these like a month ago when we did the class the first time, and so I don't remember that off the top of my head right now. But if you want to know, Gabe, I can get you that answer back. It did assume a oh goodness, I have to remember if we assumed a fixed or a tracking system for this. I did not put that in the actual
we
assumptions.
assumed a fixed. I think this was
I believe so.
fixed.
Yeah,
Not
and
tracking.
yeah, and Sam has a number of options you can do. You can do quite a spread. Yeah, for a 500 kilowatt system, you would generally see a fixed system, I think, at this point. As you get larger, utility scale systems are almost always going for tracking these days. But that's, I believe we used a fixed system and we just kind of said, okay, tilt at latitude sort of thing. Actually, that's a lie. We optimized the tilt. We started tilt at latitude. We ran the parametric analysis that Joyce showed earlier, and we found the ideal tilt angle for that location. Sorry for that brain fart. Yeah, but if you'd like to know, Gabe, just let me know and I can send you the capacity factor for it's the same for all these scenarios. Got a question from Tim. When the customer is making a capacity payment, is the customer exposed to operational risk? Say the system fails and production is impacted. Are there safeguards for the customer? That is a great question. I think that depends on how your program is set up. Sam here doesn't model for time offline. So the numbers here assume 25 years of perfect operation with degradation, et cetera, all accounted for from the production. I think programs can account for that in different ways. Some programs I think do have a guaranteed minimum. There are programs out there that say you'll get this much credit back with a guaranteed minimum. And so that's often done by, I think, private third-party developers that are very good at operating and owning systems and can guarantee they know what their downtime is, what their risk exposure is, and they have insurance to cover that. But since a lot of these are being, you're paying on a credit basis, like you said, Tim, and then receiving on a generation payment, I think the question would be, are you required to pay contractually? It would be in the legal language of the contract. Are you required to pay if you're not receiving the credit, if there is an outage? So I think you can handle that different ways. And I think that comes down to more of a legal question than a modeling question. I am not a legal expert and I can't give legal advice. I don't think my organization is allowed to anyways. But Joyce, I'm interested, have you heard of what the contracts say about non-payment in the case of non-credit or vice versa?
Yeah, so the only example I have is actually a personal example, which is a production guarantee that is in my contract for my solar system on my house. So it's not a community solar subscription, but I think the same terms could apply where there's a minimum production guarantee. And if at the end of the year, it's under the minimum for any reason, whether or not there was it's a particularly snowy year or there were operational issues or whatever, I get a gift card that makes up the difference cost wise. So basically it's just a way to show the customer that this company stands by their system and feels confident that their generation is going to be at a certain level. So I think that's one way to handle it. And I think customers, what I've heard from just incidental conversations, just that customers feel good about that, receiving some sort of a guarantee that the system will give them a certain amount. And if not, you'll get compensated in some form or fashion. And I have received gift cards over the years, I think 3 times over the last 15 years of when I guess it's been 14 years since I've gotten the system. And I think on 3 occasions I've received a gift card to true up based on the contract.
I think that would be a contractual thing. So to account for that in the language saying a customer is not required to pay if there is no generation due to an outage, or right, could be a both, which is that they might get a guaranteed minimum payment over the year. And so that would probably be something that the developer, whether it's the utility or someone else, would want to account for in their insurance and calculations to have that funds. Got a question from Tom here, and we got a great response from Anna. So the answer to that question around programs have historically had full customers or waiting lists, et cetera, is it varies a great deal. I think knowing your interest and also, like you said, the marketing materials and presentation, it depends, I think, a large part on the customer classes you have, what your community is. We have some areas where there's a wait list that we know of that they've had for years and they're never short. And if someone drops out, there's someone ready to take that subscription, no problem. And we had other groups that have had, anywhere from underwhelming uptake in the beginning to they may be expected to have 90%, subscription, fulfillment of 100% of the project. And, they took a little longer to get there, or they wavered there. They never really sat at 100% the whole time. So I think it varies a large deal. There's something to be said for making sure that if you're going to go ahead and do a project, that you feel like you're not overbuilding, especially if it's your first project. And I think marketing, making it the easier you make it for a customer to sign up and the easier you make it to understand, the more likely you will to have fuller subscriptions. So if there's a lot of interest, but then there's a lot of administrative steps, the contract to sign up are complex, and things like that, I think you're going to see maybe a disconnect between the excitement initially and the actual uptake. And so accounting for that, I think, is probably a very valuable thing to make sure that you don't make it too complex. From that idea concept to deployment and actual interaction.
And I wonder if Tim might want to jump on and talk about uptake for their program in Austin. Or he can address it.
Sure. Yeah. So in Austin, we have a subscription model where market rate customers pay $0.015 premium. And low income customers do not pay a premium at all. And it fixes a variable cost for the fuel costs. So it fixes that. Our subscriptions, we've been fully subscribed the whole time. That we have a waiting list for market rate customers. The way our CAP program works, some CAP customers fall out of that program because they are no longer qualified for it or whatever. So then we reach out to more CAP customers and backfill that as needed. But we generally don't have a problem keeping our program fully subscribed.
Just to clarify, the CAP customers it's the low income.
That's right. Yeah. So 50% of the program is designated for low income, and CAP stands for Customer Assistance Program.
And is that savings the 1 cent over for the market rate customers? Is that tied in any way to the electricity rate that they pay? Or is that? So
the customer or the community solar adjustment replaces the power supply adjustment, which is our fuel costs. And it fixes it for 15 years. So at the beginning of the program in 2018, it was a zero impact to the bill for low-income customers and $0.015 premium for market rate customers. Now those same customers, the low-income customers are saving $0.015, and the market rate customers aren't paying a premium because that power supply adjustment has gone up $0.015 since then. So they're basically starting to hedge for market rate.
That's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah. So in the last minute, I just want to say thank you. And if you guys have any more questions about the models here or anything else, we're here to help. Part of our TA program is we can help you. I can help run models like this for you. So if you know what you want to do and you want to see what the numbers need to be, we can run these exact models for you. We can test different capacity factors. We can test different savings for the customer relative to the savings or the profit to the developer. All those types of things are things we can test directly for you and your program through our TA program. So just a reminder that's the case. And remember that all this is a whole picture, right? So this is just a model of the technical and financial. At the end of the day, a lot of it comes down to actual operational considerations around how you get subscribers to sign up, how many you get, who's in your community, and how you do those administrative things rather than these are just purely technical models. So this is an account for those social and other concerns and issues. So yeah. All right, that's all for me. I'm actually going to hand it back over to Tim, I believe, who was just speaking, to give some more examples on that project versus portfolio, which was a question earlier. So hopefully this will help answer that earlier question. Over to you, Tim.
Great, thanks, Simon. Next slide, please. So as we were developing the program, we looked at these different scenarios. We looked at an upfront or monthly capacity-based subscription, what kind of very akin to what he was showing in the SAM model, where a customer pays for a per kW amount, and then they get a credit for a kWh amount. Through our stakeholder engagement, especially as it pertains to low-income customers, they did not want to make any kind of upfront investment. And they didn't want to have to assume any kind of operational risk. So that was one of the reasons why we did not move forward with that model. And, that's based on Austin Energy's experience and feedback from our customers. You may get different feedback from your customers. So the next one we looked at was just a straight adder to the power supply adjustment. So as the power supply adjustment would go up, then your community solar adjustment goes up as well. So we have another program that's very similar to that, Green Choice. It's a wind program. It's always a premium. It's just a floating adder on top of the power supply adjustment. And that program has, a lot of subscription to it, but what it doesn't have is low income subscription. Practically no low income customer wants to pay more on their electric bill. And so that was the reason that we didn't move forward with that model. Panel ownership, I'll skip down panel ownership because it's another one we didn't move forward on. That's the idea where the customers pay upfront for the panels that they want to be assigned to, and then the production gets assigned to the customer. Again, there's an upfront cost there, and that kind of excluded the low income customers. So what we ended up going with was a PSA lock. So essentially we're replacing the power supply adjustment with the community solar adjustment, and that is locked in for a period of 15 years. So as the power supply adjustment goes up and down, there's a potential for our customers to hedge. And there's a guarantee for low-income customers that they would never pay more than the PSA. And so what has happened since then is that the power supply adjustment did go up because of adjustments in the ERCOT market to try to increase capacity. And so, as I mentioned earlier, low-income customers are now saving a little bit more than $0.015. And the market rate customers that signed up back in 2019 are now, they're pretty much cost neutral. They're paying about 1/10 of a cent less than everyone else. And if that PSA continues to go up, eventually that hedge is going to pay off for market rate customers if it goes up. And no one knows how that's going to work out in the long run. So it is kind of, you're hedging your bets on that as a market rate customer. But most of them, I think, are kind of, they do this for other purposes that are very akin to why they do Green Choice with a pure penny premium every time, because they are interested in being part of the environmental movement, and they want to support the local solar activity in our area. Next slide. So a little bit more about our program. We were the first Green E certified community solar program. Green E certification is something that you might want to explore. Greenie ensures that there's not double accounting, so that you can say, okay, customer A, you can make certain claims about your renewable energy consumption, and those same claims can't be made by some other customer. So it's an accounting of the RECs, it's accounting of the claims. And it's a little bit more useful, I would say, if there is a commercial component to it, because residential customers aren't going to typically make any kind of claims. But a commercial customer may say, yes, this product was made with 100% renewable energy or something like that. And so it's kind of making sure that those claims are in alignment with what they're allowed to say and with the program. Our program offsets 100% of the participants' usage. So we don't have any other options right now for that. Either you're enrolled to green up 100% of your consumption or not. And as I mentioned before, the community solar adjustment replaces the power supply adjustment, and it's fixed for 15 years. Half of the capacity is dedicated to CAP. And as you can see on the bottom there at the right, it shows the difference between what they were paying in 2018 and what they get now, because they've locked in and the PSA has changed. So now they're starting to save more money because the PSA went up. So one other thing that's very important to note, that Austin Energy's portfolio costs are higher than the program recovery. So there is subsidization happening within this program, where non-program participants are subsidizing the program. And so, that's something that we're working to improve with each iteration of new additions to the portfolio. So this kind of leads back to that portfolio concept that Joyce was referring to earlier. And the idea is that as we add to the portfolio, our intentions are to continue to scale these projects and garner those economies of scale. And over time, as we incorporate lower cost projects, then that portfolio will eventually be able to fully recover through the market rate subscriptions. And then as we do that and potentially reduce those costs even further with additional projects, then we'll be able to reduce the premium that market rate customers have. And we would reduce that across the board so that even customers that are hedging could hedge even further. So that's the idea of that. That's what's driving us to seek low cost projects. And we're very hopeful that with the addition of the IRA funding and certain other grants that are out there, that we can get that down to a lower amount, to where we've eliminated the subsidization from non-participants and are able to pass on those benefits further to our subscribers. Next slide. So any questions about that?
There's a question in the chat. Is there dual participation between the REC customers and the community solar customers? I guess the REC customers meaning the Green Choice Program.
No, you're either in one or the other, because both of those programs green up 100% of the consumption. And I should note also, just a little bit more detail. At Austin Energy, we do the customer acquisition. So we're not looking for a third party to do that. We have our own marketing. We take payments on the bill. And for low-income customers, we provide those credits as well on the bill. So you know, that part is done in-house, and that reduces the cost of a community solar program. If whatever you're able to do in-house, you know, it's going to cost less than if you're going out to a third party generally. But that said, we had already set up our billing system to be capable of those transactions because we had the Green Choice program and have had that for 20 plus years. So that was already built into our billing system. And I can tell you for sure that billing system enhancements are not cheap, and they definitely come at a cost. And that's something that you would want to explore and build into your models.
Yeah, and I think that pretty much wraps up our day today. We don't have any more material to share, but we do want to be in touch with you. So please do stay in touch and contact us as you move forward with your projects. And I really do appreciate all your participation today. And we were happy to see so much interest in this material.
Great class.
Oh, thank you. Well, thanks, Joyce. I'm actually gonna go to the next last slide. This has the resources. Also, again, we'll email out a lot of these links. But once again, thank you to all the speakers. Really appreciate it. It was great. 2 days of content. Thank you for all who participated and provided comments or asked questions. The evaluation has been put in the link. Please fill it out, especially if you need continuing education credits. You need to fill it out to earn those. So, and then if you have any questions, please email educationinfo@publicpower.org. I put my email in also earlier. So thank you once again to all the speakers for great presentations. All of you will receive an email shortly with the recordings of these sessions. With a follow-up email, and then the recordings will be available in your document portal by next Thursday. So, again, thank you all for participating. Thank you for your great comments and your feedback. We appreciate it. And I would also encourage you, if you're interested in community solar and have a potential project, DEED is an option. Our R&D program. We are accepting grant applications through August 15th. Otherwise, please get in touch with me if you have any other questions about APPA and how we can help you with community solar programs. So thanks all, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.